All right, everyone. Good evening. This is our final sustainability speaker series, hosted by Patel College and Globe, and it's going to be presented by Anthony Halcyon. Tonight, we're going to be doing exploring water conservation and natural resource security. If you're not already, please go ahead and sign in using this QR code. It will take you to Bulls Connect, and this just helps us to track our engagement. Once I see phones go down, I know that everybody signed in. We've got a couple more QR codes after this, so I would keep your phone at the ready. All right, these are a couple different ways to keep up with Globe. If you've been to the other sustainability speaker series, these are the same QR codes, nothing's changed. But if you have not, we've got the Instagram, the GroupMe, and the Bulls Connect. Instagram is where we're going to be posting some of our major events and collaborations that we do with other student organizations. GroupMe, that's where we post volunteer opportunities. These are going to be internships. If I see any general opportunities come up that I think that would be good for people to get involved with, I think we recently had a poster opportunity as well. If you want to, present any research you're doing, that's a great channel to do that. And then Bulls Connect is where we put our events. Some of you guys might have found us through there. Some of you might have found us through the boards that are placed outside. Lots of different avenues to find this. And we're going to continue doing the sustainability speaker series into next semester, currently getting a lineup of wonderful speakers for spring. All right, keep up with Patel. So this is the QR code for their Instagram. So if you'd like to follow Patel, again, if you've been here for the other sustainability speaker series, this will be a little bit new for you. And then here we've got the sustainability Fair and Expo. This is going to be taking place on November 12th. I highly recommend coming out. We have an amazing lineup of people that will be coming out. So go ahead and come out, do your conversations, do your networking. Most people are in college to either pursue research or a job. So this is a wonderful avenue to do that. Be able to make it out. Today, as usual, we try to highlight some form of UN SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal. So today is going to be number 6, clean water and sanitation. I'm sure Anthony will be going into that in his presentations, but we've got the framework for water conservation. This is something that we try to do in alignment with the speaker's presentation. In this case, residents developing their own plan for responsible water use by learning about water restrictions and codes, receiving information on rebates and water-saving technologies, and gaining education on water science and conservation. We also have sustainability and resilience, initiatives encouraging the sustainable management of water resources, promoting responsible water use, and helping communities build long-term resilience. It's about the speaker. So Anthony, we have your blurb, but we also went ahead and took some personalized stuff from your LinkedIn. So that's that second paragraph there. So Anthony Halcyon is a scientist dedicated to global water security and ethical exploration. I think we've got some people trying to. The work combines scientific field expeditions, community conservation programs, and international collaboration of vital resources and access to potable water. Beyond science, he enjoys storytelling and writes science fiction and fantasy that explores new ideas and pushes creative boundaries. A lifelong learner, he is always ready to take on new challenges and connect with others to share knowledge and opportunities. Only the presentation description. Anthony has worked locally on projects related to Hillsborough County's water supply and has also participated in field science abroad, having adventurous moments in both Europe and Africa. So sign in. In fact, we just had a couple of people come in. If you'd like to go ahead and sign in on Bulls Connect, a couple seconds for that. Anthony? Really? That's all you? That's good. 20.
Thank you very much. As he so wonderfully introduced me, my name is Anthony Halcyon. I work with Hillsborough County. I've been with the county for about 3 years in total, a little over 3 now, actually, and about 1.5 years in this role. I did work in the laboratory before that. So whenever you got like a boil water notice, that was me. And then now I have a bit more of a public outreach, speaking to the public kind of role. So we're going to get into what I talk about. So the initial thing that I always come up with whenever I speak with people is everybody has a different definition of what water conservation means. And really don't think there is one true answer. There probably is a literal definition, but a practical or a pragmatic one is a little trickier to get a hold of. And the reason I say that is because even entities that are in charge of kind of defining it have very vast differences. The Florida Administrative Code has a kind of a real quick one-sentence description, but then the American Water Works Association has like a paragraph. And, they talk about a lot of things, economics gets brought up, the practicality of stuff. There's a climate aspect sometimes that gets brought up. So it's really multifaceted and it means different things for different people. And in my experience, a lot of times it's just sitting down and talking with people about what it means to them is the most effective way of them learning about it rather than me saying, hey, it's this, do this. And roughly speaking, there's about 3 ways in my role here, at least, that you can kind of frame that definition with people. The least popular of those ways is through restrictions and code. Thankfully, I'm not actually in code enforcement, so I'm not in charge of enforcing any rules and getting yelled at. But I do try to help people understand that there's workarounds. You can integrate different technology that is considered an exemption to some of the rules for things like 1 or 2 day a week watering restrictions. And also, if you do adopt those technologies, a lot of times there's rebates. You can get money back for doing the right thing, and it will probably reduce the amount of water you're using, so you'll save on your water bill. So it's kind of a win-win. You get money initially for doing it, and then you ideally across long term save money. And the last one is the trickiest one, but also the most enjoyable is the perspective shift. It's, whether you love it or hate it, a lot of times the word conservation kind of gets politicized. And, it doesn't have to be. I always use humor to disarm people, but I kind of use an extreme example. I'll say, I've never met anybody that likes needles being dumped into a lake. To me, that's not a political statement. That's just called being normal. And that's kind of the mindset I try to give people is that it doesn't have to be a political thing. It's just, looking at a resource and being able to make sure the next person has it just as good, if not better than you had. So that diplomatic way of speaking to people is probably the most important, but also admittedly the most difficult. And also it's just showing people where it comes from. A lot of times they say knowing's half the battle, and that's certainly the case with the public water supply itself. Well, not even about, there are 3 different sources, but the amount varies for how much you get for some of those. The lion's share of our public water supply, which is in a blend, that's a bit of an industry term, a blend of tap water comes from 60% of the, or excuse me, 60% of the blend comes from groundwater in the Floridan aquifer. So whenever things like well permits are being approved, that's some of the stuff they consider is, how much of it is being drawn across time. That'd be more so the Southwest Florida Water Management District that does that kind of thing, not specifically the county, but we have a role in kind of maintaining and monitoring that stuff. And then about a third, 30%, 35% is surface water. So it'd be things like rivers and reservoirs, that type of stuff. And then the last bit is 5 to 10% comes from desal. And desalination is going to be coming from your estuary. There's a desal plant located, I don't remember the address, unfortunately, but in the Tampa Bay area. And one thing that I also like to bring up to people is that this particular part of the world is one of the few places that pulls from all 3. Usually when people dip into desalination, it's because they have to. They live in a desert and they're next to an ocean and that's it. The well or the groundwater is far too deep for them to practically reach it. And a lot of times they have to heavily subsidize that industry. So the water could be a lot more expensive if they're not careful with it. We're in a very privileged part of the world that happens to have all 3. There's only a couple places. California is one, and I think Saudi Arabia might have some shallow groundwater sources and a little bit of surface water, but they rely mostly on desal too. And like I mentioned, they're heavily subsidized. So, it's letting people know that we have a very robust water portfolio, and we're very fortunate. And if we don't be careful with it, we won't be able to enjoy that privilege. So I always like to just show that because it really kind of emphasizes it. There's also seasonal changes. I don't know who all grew up hearing April showers bring May's flowers. I know some people have heard that, some people haven't. That's not the case at all in Florida. April is the peak of the drought for Florida. So I always joke and say April's drought brings May's dead grass because it's way more accurate that way to say it. And you really see this big disparaging difference in the weather when you look at the months between June and September. That's mostly due to hurricanes. Sometimes you get an odd one, like last year we had 2 in October. But most of the rain and most of the hurricanes occur in that 4 or 5 month period there. And about 52 inches of rain is the annual average. So I want to say Milton and Helene last year did about 42 inches. So we'll call that 75% in 2 days. Kind of crazy when you word it that way. and then rain does the rest. But we do have those long stretches where even technically now, even though we had rain a few days ago, we are technically in the drought now. It goes from October all the way to May, and it doesn't really peak until April. But it's interesting. A lot of people don't realize that stuff. There's also geophysical allocation. This one actually in particular works really well with kids. If I'm ever talking at the Great American Teach-In or just speaking to kids in an event, it's, I'll quiz them. I'll say, how much percentage of the water do you think is available? Keywords available. And they'll say, oh, 20%. That's not a bad guess. But 97.5% is salt water. So that's already right there. You can't drink that unless you do that desalination that I was talking about. So the remaining 2.5% is all we have to work with. Of 2/3 of that, over 2/3 of that actually is ice caps and glaciers. So, they're melting. That's not a good thing, but so we can't use them yet. And groundwater is the remaining 20%. So 1/5 of 2.5% is what you can use. And then that tiny little sliver there is that 1% of surface waters I was talking about. So we'll say all in total about 1%. I'm probably rounding up when I say that is actually available for us to use. And then you also have to take into account that requires treatment. You can't just take a puddle from the ground and start drinking it. You'll get quite ill if you do that. So there's a term in economics called a Pareto distribution. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that term. I've seen a few people shake their heads, so maybe. But it's, long story short, it's a massive disproportionate amount of something goes towards one thing. So like an example would be the periodic table. 99% of matter is hydrogen and helium. The rest of the periodic table is that broken up 1% across all, aluminum, gold, the whole 9 yards. And you kind of see that here too, is that all the water we have is that tiny little sliver. So keeping that stuff in mind is always fair. And there's also some trends that we've been monitoring across the county. So this doesn't probably look too crazy, but keep in mind this is on millions of gallons a day. This is going to be any area north of the Alafaya River. That's for our customers, at least. And you can see there's a pretty steady increase for daily use. About 16, we'll call that maybe 16.5 million gallons back in 2008 was the average. And you have some peaks and gaps and stuff like that, just from rainfall activity, making it to where you don't water as much or, whatever. Maybe you're placing new sod, filling the pool. There's reasons for those peaks and valleys. But you can see a pretty consistent line going up. And it went up to 18.61 in January 2024. So, not crazy, maybe a 15% increase in demand. But with South County, where all the construction is being built, it's basically doubled. I'm kind of rounding up a little bit here, but we'll call that 25, 26, and it's nearly at 50. Keep in mind, this is over a year ago, so it's probably worse because it's a very popular state to move to. And Hillsborough County in particular, not by percent, but by number, by just sheer number of people, actually had the most migration of any county last year for Florida, at least. So this, unfortunately, I guess it's a good problem to have as far as people coming in and, enjoying our state, but it makes water infrastructure a little more difficult to manage when you look at that. And it's also not just exclusive to us. This is a statewide issue. This bar is actually, or this graph rather, is actually a much longer time span. It's a 100-year study, if you will. But this was done by Dr. Nick Taylor at the Center for Land Use Efficiency with the University of Florida. And you can see here around, I don't know if this has a pointer or not. Around 1990, it starts to really hockey stick formation up. It's kind of out of control there. And the crazy thing is that around the 1990s, that's when the EPA started initiating clean energy efficiency standards. Energy is also very heavily tied to water. Not against electricity or anything like that, but all forms of energy, even the green ones, often require water. That's kind of the hidden cost, so to speak. And it's kind of telling that when there was regulations that made it to where things were supposed to get more efficient, despite that, it still went out of control. And a big reason why is because you did kind of get this interesting phenomenon where the middle class was able to afford things that they historically couldn't, like pools. And middle class in the 1920s wasn't having a pool. So again, it's one of those kind of Pyrrhic victories. It's a good thing. Everybody's getting wealthier, but the amount of single family homes with in-ground irrigation, which is the orange line, and the amount of water those homes were using both went up pretty much 1-to-1. I know correlation doesn't mean causation, but it's kind of hard to ignore that. That's looking pretty damning. So just definitely not just exclusive to us. It's certainly a statewide matter. And what I do to bring more attention to this is sometimes it's very simple stuff. It's just educating people on rules that we have in place. It could be watering restrictions that we have. Currently, we're at a 2 day a week, which is depending on your the final number of your address. So these are the days that you can water, basically. And there's some exceptions though, like, if you place a new sod or you do like a chemical application, but for the most part, you're not supposed to go any beyond those 2 days a week. Also, just a little heads up for you all, Swift Mud, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, is probably going to change it to 1 day a week in like a month. So when that happens, we will be beholden to their rules, and letting people know that those rules have changed is part of what I do. Because, it does kind of suck when a day ago you were allowed to do 2 days a week and then you get dinged by code enforcement, and it's just a headache. So I like to try to get people ahead of the curve. There's also knowing your watering times. A lot of times well, not even a lot of times, all the time, we say don't water between 8 and 6. The reason why is because a lot of evaporation will occur at that point. Fully endorse watering overnight. That's, in my opinion, the best time to do it. You don't got to worry about anybody getting in there, getting wet, nothing like that. So it's a nice place. And just for in general information, not even just water conservation matters, I do recommend anybody who's interested in staying up with our updates is getting the HCFL Alert app. It's a really good app because it'll allow you to get just all kinds of information. It could be hurricane related news. It could be that boil water notice that I mentioned in the lab work that I used to do, or it could be a change in your watering days. So it's just nice just to keep it up because, you can avoid accidentally breaking a rule. It's nice to adopt. And then this one's a little bit more boring, but a lot of times I get called and people think I work for billing. So I've gotten very used to knowing what the bill looks like and answering some questions. So what was that?
Probably why you were talking to my dad.
Yeah, yeah. So,
His job.
I just,
Question on the watering days.
yes.
So if it goes from 2 days to one,
Mhm.
they also state the time because
The time should stay, the time will either stay the same or it might, I don't think it will, but it might go 10 to 4, 10 PM, 10 AM to 4 PM.
watering time. What I'm saying is instead of 30 minutes, people can do it for 45 minutes or 1 hour.
Oh, I see. I believe it's 30. I'll have to double check and I'd be happy to get your email in case you want to officially know, but I believe it's 30 minutes. So I'll just double check that. I don't want to promise you, but I know it's no more than an hour for sure, but I just don't want to tell you something wrong. But yes, so a lot of times the bill is something that gets brought up, and as silly as it sounds, sometimes it's just talking to the person and explaining why their bill is so high. Up to 50% of your bill can come from watering. So just from watering your lawn. A lot of people don't realize it, but just removing that or becoming a little more efficient with that can really go a long way, saving you money and saving the infrastructure side of us from having to do upkeep from excessive water use. Our pipes take wear and tear just as much as the sprinklers do. Then there's also a water bill calculator on our website. So if let's say you're filling up a pool and you go, gosh, is my bill going to be like $500 at the end of this month? It won't be, because we have a wastewater. It's kind of a poor quality, unfortunately, but wastewater rate facility charge, I believe is what that says. And then there's a cap. You see, it says capped at 8,000 gallons per month. Basically, long story short, what that means is after you've taken 8,000 gallons out of the tap, no matter what type, whether it's the sink, the shower, the sprinklers, the pool, whatever, we stop charging you the wastewater part, because there's a good chance that you are filling up a pool and it's probably not going to enter our wastewater treatment center. It's probably just going to evaporate or slowly get into your yard every time you cannonball into the pool or whatever. So they have that in place. And I like to use this as an example because this 3,500 gallons a month is it's the average for someone who doesn't water their lawn. 15,000 isn't necessarily average, but it's pretty close to what somebody could expect if they do water their lawn. And despite that being a 5 times difference, it's not a 5 times difference in cost. So that's why I like to show that example. It just kind of shows, okay, it's not going to be $1,000 bill, don't worry. And a lot of times that helps people understand it. And what I do is stuff like this. I talk to people, and this was me last year at the Great American Teach-In. I plan to do that again this year. And hopefully I'll be talking to high school here. That seems to be the group that has reserved my speech. And then there's also the Hello Hillsborough podcast. That's a relatively newer podcast that Hillsborough implemented. They talk about a wide variety of subjects, but for Water Conservation Month, which is April, they had me appear. And yeah, just sometimes reaching out and talking to people through unique methods is a really effective way of getting the word out. Lastly, I don't know if this is lastly, but one of the last things I do is we work really closely with a group called Tampa Bay Water. Tampa Bay Water is our wholesaler. So they're the people who, remember I mentioned that desal plant? They're the people who run it. And they essentially give us and all the local utilities the water. So the same water that City of Tampa drinks is what you and I drink here. Not so much for Temple Terrace and Plant City. They get it from someplace else, but a lot of the areas to the west of Plant City and Temple Terrace will all be the same tap water supply. They just maybe have different rates and stuff like that. Maybe Pinellas charges it a little different, but quality wise, it should be pretty much the same. But the reason I work with these people is also they are the ones who have the rebate programs. I've mentioned one of the ways to reach out to people is to show them that they can get money back for adopting better water-friendly tech. These are the people who do it. And if you're interested in any of their rebates, you can find that at their website, which is tampabaywaterwise.org. Wise like wisdom. And then I think I mentioned to you, I work a little bit with UF IFAS Extension. This is a little more indirect, but a lot of times if people are just really puzzled, they can't figure out what it is about their sprinkling system that's going haywire. Maybe they just don't understand the tech to program it correctly. A lot of times we can send them over to Extension and they'll work with them. This is especially the case if you do that 15,000 gallon a month issue all over again, because that's kind of indicative that you're what we would call a high water user. And maybe you have a leak. You know, a lot of times people, they're like, I swear I'm not using the sprinkler, but it turns out the sprinkler system has a leak and it's just been constantly giving out water below the surface. So, you know, a irrigation evaluation is certainly something that they can do. And a lot of times they'll fix the problem before it really spirals out of control. Now, we do have a two-parter for this, so this is the end of my domestic work. But if anybody has any questions about the water conservation side of stuff before I jump into the explorer stuff, I'd be happy to answer them first.
Yeah, I was wondering, how did you end up getting involved with the Hillsborough County? Like, how did you start working with them?
Yeah, so truthfully, I just found a job opening. I did work for the DEP before that. So I did a land management job. Fancy way of saying I used a chainsaw and did control burns. It was a very fun job, but it was part-time, no benefits. So I needed something better. And I came across the lab job was hiring, and I didn't know it at the time, but there was actually 4 openings for that one position. There was 4 positions in total, but they only advertised 1. So I didn't realize my chances were a little better than average. But I got quite lucky, if I'm being honest. I didn't have really any formal lab experience, but I guess I just was able to sway them. And they gave me a shot. I suspect I was probably number 4 of those 4 because they just had a little bit more experience than me. But that, if for anybody who wants to apply to that lab in particular, in my experience, they are pretty good about taking new people who don't have experience, because a lot of times you develop bad habits when you work, especially if you work for like a private lab. And I don't want to say anything too specific, but quality over quantity is not always their mindset. And you might develop some bad lab habits. So, you know, if they do end up kind of viewing you as this clean slate, it could be a really viable route. So just shamelessly applied. That's how I got here.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I haven't seen.
Gotcha. Got a couple of questions. The main one, though, I think is something that I run into a lot, especially since my dad works for county water. You know, he works for county water and he stands by his product, you know, but I know a lot of people who are very hesitant towards using tap water and instead buy a lot of bottled water. So I guess this isn't really a question for like conserving the tap, because this would get people to use more tap water, I suppose. But I do want to know, like, what can I do to tell people that the water is actually fine? Because we're not in like Flint, Michigan or something.
Yeah,
like the
well,
water is okay.
You know, I mean, it's a fair question because, you know, people do cite Flint, Michigan as
Exactly.
as an example. But I will say, I mean, I always tell them, well, I mean, I drink it every day and I'm
Yeah.
fine. Of course, that's assuming they view me as a normal person. but you know, if we're going off of like regulatory things, we do have to adhere to state and federal rules. Now,
Mhm.
of course, the kicker to that answer is that they have to agree that those rules are viable, and depending on their views of government, they may or may not like that answer. So unfortunately, sometimes no matter what you say, you will not be able to convince them. They are just,
Yeah.
no matter what. But a lot of times if I say, it's public record where we have to show you all of our quality reports, everything, the whole 9 yards. We get a internal as well as external audit in the labs as well. So they're even making sure that the people testing that it's good are being tested. So, there's a lot of fail safes involved. So a lot of times I tell them that, and that seems to appease them pretty well. But sometimes it's just not good enough, and no matter what, it's just they won't like it.
And the other thing I get is people citing like that they're afraid of getting kidney stones for drinking tap water. And I don't know anyone who that's actually happened to.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
admittedly, I'm not an expert on kidney stones,
Yeah.
but I'm sure diet's a big part. There's probably a genetic component.
Yeah.
I mean, I've drunk tap water probably every day of my life, and I haven't had a kidney stone yet. So anecdotal evidence, admittedly, but I don't think there'd be a relationship there. I
Yeah.
think that's fair.
And so, yeah, you don't know of any like studies that have been done where they've actually like proven, because again, I know it's not actually a big problem. And so
Yeah.
I doubt the county's actually done studies on that.
Well, that's where it gets tricky too, is like you can't disprove a negative, you know
Right,
what I mean?
exactly.
Like I can't say it doesn't not do something,
Yeah.
so, you know what I mean? So I probably not. I can't say for certain it's never been done, but if I had to guess, it probably
Yeah.
hasn't been done.
And then another, I know you probably want to move on to your next section, but I do want to know, because this is something that I think about a lot studying environmental policy. And especially, talking about Plant City and stuff, we have a lot of agriculture,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of that uses water and things like that. Um, like, since you do a lot of public outreach and that sort of thing, like, how do you try to communicate with people who are like major water users and feel it's necessary for their livelihood and things like that? How do you communicate to them? Like, how can they use less water, and how do you communicate that to them that it's necessary?
With agriculture in particular, that actually is not what I handle, but I will say I do have some heavy water users. I
Yeah.
think that might be FDAX, or it could be even SwiftMud that handles the agriculture water use, because a lot of times they get permits. So like that whole, like, you can't water more than once or twice a week.
Right, yeah.
Obviously, that's not the case for crops. There are exemptions. And I believe they get permits either from FDAX or SwiftMud. It's probably SwiftMud.
Okay.
But I mean, I work with golf courses sometimes, HOAs that just water all day, every day, the whole 9 yards. And a lot of times it's introducing them to alternative methods. Could be reclaimed water. Reclaim's tricky because you kind of get like a feast or famine thing. Nobody wants it when it's raining, and then suddenly everybody wants it when it's a drought. And there's some other components there. There's a little bit of an odor component. So, so a lot of times it's showing them that there's a few other options out there. Then they have to also be willing to want that option, or alternatively trying to get them to convert the lawn or whatever it is that they're using into something that doesn't use as much water.
Yeah.
So maybe it's converting some of that turf grass into mulch. It sounds silly, but that is a really easy way. Mulch doesn't need watering. And or maybe swapping out some of that grass with really drought tolerant Florida native plants. So there's options out there. It's just whether or not they want to explore those options. And I can't force them, but I can
Right.
educate them for sure.
Okay. That makes sense.
Is that it for?
So from the slides, the presentation, I saw like in Tampa Bay, we use desalination, like 5 to 10%. And you also said like not many places use all the three water source. Then why does Tampa has to use desalinated water?
Why do we? Is that what?
Why?
Honestly, I think it's just to make it more robust. I think part of the reason is, well, groundwater is a tricky one because we do have sinkholes. So, we can't draw too crazy from groundwater. There is a little bit of a safety component to that. And also, I think that they just want to try to be able to have a robust portfolio, because the way things are going, we probably will eventually have to rely on desal. The longer you have something, the more innovative you can get with it, spend more money, spend more research into it. And I think they're trying to get ahead of the curve. Don't know for sure. Maybe that has nothing to do with it, but I don't see any other realistic option than us leaning more and more into desal as it becomes cheaper. And I think that's why they're opting to do it when they have to.
Desalination is still one of the most expensive
It is.
method, right?
Yeah, I think they said, and I could be wrong on this specific number, but I think they said if they did only desal, it'd be about $3 a gallon. Now, keep in mind, it's less than a penny a gallon currently. So it would be thousands of times more expensive if it was just purely desal. Now, of course, in a crazy Mad Max situation like that, they probably would just have to resort to subsidies. The government would have to step in and say, okay, well, we can't charge people $3 a gallon. I mean, nobody's going to take a shower if that's the case. So that's extreme. You know, that's such a wild hypothetical. It's probably not going to be that dire, but it is the most expensive. So, I mean, I use it more as an example than a hypothesis.
Because then regardless of if it uh raise the price of the average price of water, you just like use it for robust.
Yeah, so it doesn't raise it up much. I mean, that's kind of a subjective statement. I think after they did this most recent cost adjustment, it was only like six cents more per 1,000 gallons or something like that. It wasn't that much because they're still doing 90% with that. And then also that number goes up and down a little bit. That's just like a rough number. There's some months where it's down entirely for maintenance. So those months, it's not really causing any money. I mean, other than the property value, you got to pay that. But other than that, it's so it varies a little bit, but it's really not as expensive as it would seem because it's such a small fraction. It does raise the number, admittedly, it does raise it a little bit, but it's not raising it significantly.
And then the desalination like facilities, like it or
So it's owned, my understanding it's owned by Tampa Bay Water. So, I mean, they do tours and stuff. So, I mean, I've been there as a member of the Hillsborough County. But I believe, I want to say Tampa Bay Water is ran by a group called EGIA, which is a energy something. I don't know, but I think they get like government contracts and they work with people. So yes, it is private, but they work very closely with municipalities.
and then other questions like also one of the slides, customer demands. I saw there's like some patterns.
Oh, yes.
The water usage is like spiking up. What normally caused that?
That's okay. He's not there now.
What normally caused that pattern? It's like, what is the main factor?
So that's probably going to be seasonality differences. That might have just been like a demonstration image just to kind of show that there are changes. Probably not going to be quite that extreme for 1 month or this.
Okay.
But it's probably what it's trying to represent is that some months you might not water at all. You know, especially if they're like, again, if there's a hurricane, it's got all the water it needs for several weeks. So it's probably just showing that. But there are dips. I mean, you saw those trend lines. You saw that those are, thousands and thousands of people,
Yeah.
but that's sort of an overarching representation of the individual. And those went up and down. So you see those differences in values. Maybe 1 month you put in new grass. So you have to water a lot when you do that. So yeah.
I know, if this is too big of a question and you want to move on for other things, I don't mind, but I think a lot about like, I wonder do you have any tips for trying to depoliticize the conversation of conservation? Because like, I wasn't there for it, but I remember reading about like when the administration switched from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, he was able to sort of capitalize on Carter's support of sustainability and conservation and say like, well, you're trying to make us live with less, trying to make Americans live with less because of the failures of their fathers are going to result in a worse life for their children. He's tried to sort of frame it like Carter was, trying to make us all like live with less and be less and like, pay for our sins sort of thing, and I understand he made points that seemed very valid to a lot of people, and so I wonder like, how do you depoliticize that and how do you sort of promote conservation, especially with people who tend to lean towards more conservative political views?
I've noticed, and that's a great question. I've noticed that usually this particular way of framing it makes it very apolitical. I've never met anybody left or right or center that doesn't agree with this statement. When it's a shared resource, like air quality, for example, everybody breathes the same air. Would you want a smokestack right next to your house? Some sort of factory emissions right out there? That's why we have zoning laws. I know nobody likes zoning laws because it makes building and all that stuff difficult, but it has its utility. And I think if you view any natural resource as a shared resource, whether that's because you're a hunter or you're just bird watcher, whatever your reasoning is, I think that opens up people's mind. They go, well, I do kind of use that in a recreational way. It's not purely a political thing. So I think viewing it as a a joint ownership, if you will, like air, is really important. And I think that helps a lot. Again, there's some people that just don't care. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter whatever I say, they're gonna be against it, and that's not the majority, though. I'd say 90% of people are at least willing to work with me a little bit.
They're just very loud.
Hold up.
Those people who are, against it are just very loud.
Yeah, yeah, oftentimes a loud minority
Yeah.
makes the normal majority look quite bad.
Right.
Have a question. The Hillsborough County has any plan or management for rain harvesting with the people, community, and stormwater runoff management?
I don't know of any particular plans, but we do fully allow, and then me personally, I endorse using rain barrels. University of Florida Extension actually offers courses, and I think it's like $10 or something like that, $20 maybe, for the whole course, and you get the rain barrel at the end. So, you're more than welcome to do that, and I could be wrong, but I don't think there's any rules. I don't think even HOAs can overrule it as long as there's not some sort of graphics on there that make it inappropriate. So no official programs that we really promote other than that course, but there's no rules that say you can't do it. The things. But yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful. So the only thing I will say with those is if you are planning on using a rain barrel, don't use it on anything that you're going to eat. Some people have like backyard gardens because when you're taking water that's coming off those gutters, you don't know what's on those gutters. So just more of a safety concern than anything at that point. Yeah, great question. Is that it for WaterCon? We can go to Explorer stuff. Up one up.
So there are multiple institutions, that deal with water in Florida. So your department is one, DEP, SWIFMAP. So what is the relationship then? How do you work with them?
A lot of times it's in the form of reporting. Like I mentioned, we have certain demands that we have to live up to at the state and federal level. And then also it's not always just a regulatory thing. A lot of times we'll work together on like a joint project. Like for example, we do seagrass assessments. This isn't really water conservation, but it's adjacent to my field. And some of the stormwater scientists will actually go out into the bay and they'll do work with seeing how the seagrass is doing. Because once again, it's one of those shared resources where maybe groups like the Department of Transportation play a role in that, and so does the state, and so does the county, and so does the city of Tampa. And we'll go out to places like off the coast of E.G. Simmons Park. I don't know if anybody knows where that is, but it's a county park. And we'll do that as well. So, and we'll report to each other. We'll kind of make sure all of our numbers are roughly the same, that we're all seeing kind of the same stuff on our end, because there shouldn't be too much of a stark difference across what we're looking at. And then the other end is the regulatory part. So we do have a reporting requirement as it gets higher up that we have to at least meet their rules, if not exceed them in quality. Can never go under or else we get in quite a lot of trouble. So. I think that's it. We can go to part 2. So in addition to doing the domestic work for the county. Oh, thank you. In addition to doing the work for the county, I also am part of a group called the Explorers Club. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, because for some reason it seems like nobody's ever heard of it, and I didn't even know about it until a few years ago. But they got some pretty famous members. The late Jim Goodall was a member, and Teddy Roosevelt was a former member as well. So it's a bunch of field scientists, archaeologists, and people who have contributed to getting outside and kind of embracing the world. So whenever I meet people who are interested in this field of science, I always like to plug this because it might be something that you guys pursue one day or want to now even. So this is going to be a little bit more of like a biography than work at first. But back in 2016, I was an EMT, used to work on an ambulance, and I had a 2-year degree, but I didn't have anything else as far as formal education. Mom made me go to college and I went to HCC. It's kind of how that worked out. And I knew I didn't want to do that forever. And I knew I wanted to do something in the environmental field. I just wasn't sure what. I always liked it. I grew up in a small farm town, Plant City, that kind of place. And, I thought it'd be one of those things where it would probably be decent to have something that I could dip into agriculture if I needed to, because I knew that would have some job security, or the environment, or whatever. And although I really enjoyed the EMT thing and it gave me a lot of great skills, like talking to people and high stress issues and being composed, all that type of stuff, and also using the Feynman method, which if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's taking a really complex subject and bringing it down to like a child's understanding. That's not meant to be insulting. It's meant to take it as like you took something complex and made it very basic to where anyone can digest it. So it allowed me to develop skills like that. I did that for a while. During downtime in between the calls, you would get a little bored, admittedly. Sometimes people would work out, sometimes people would catch up on that audiobook. And what I ended up doing was just looking up subjects I really knew nothing of, so or knew very little of, but I wanted to learn more. And eventually I came across the water crisis of 2050. It's a hypothetical, but it's got some data backing it. And basically, long story short, about 52% of the world will be in a state of water stress with current predictions. Water stress is kind of another one of those definitions that doesn't really seem to have a real definition, but in a nutshell, it's the water security that you have in place is not enough for a viable long-term sustainability. I think it was like Cape Town in South Africa. They were counting down the days of how much water they had left a few years back. I think they've actually gotten a little better since then, but it can get quite dire. And historically, it's only been really remote areas that have dealt with that, but it seems like it's becoming more and more prominent. So I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty worthy challenge to address. So I kind of just went for it. And I ended up leaving the EMT world and I went kind of full force on getting a 4-year degree. I enrolled at UF. They had a really attractive soil and water science program that I found quite interesting. And just fully committed to that. I got in really good shape because I knew if I was going to work outside, I could not be as heavy as I was. I lost about 100 pounds through pretty much the entire first year of COVID. So since we were all stuck indoors, I figured, well, I guess I'll just do a lot of sit-ups until something changes. So very transformative year, and that certainly rolled into my education. As I was wrapping up my bachelor's degree, now mind you, this was during COVID, so I didn't think much of it at the time. I sent an email out to a study abroad program with Iceland. And I was like, okay, the University of Reykjavik, that sounds pretty cool. They want these students to just present interesting ideas. Sure, I'm sure they'll be willing to take little old me in the middle of a pandemic when traveling is tricky. So I didn't think much of it, but I submitted the application. And a few weeks later, I actually, lo and behold, got an email. So I ended up getting to do a couple weeks out in Iceland. And my project was based around fog harvesting. So I was considering, actually at that point, I was actually fully enrolling into my master's program. And I knew I wanted to do something with getting more water in a viable way. So I thought, well, water from fog, that's kind of an unconventional way of getting water. And then also I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. So I thought moisture farming and Luke Skywalker and all that stuff. I was like, well, that'd be kind of neat if I was able to do that in real life. So I ended up making that's not the one I made. That's actually the one in the Atacama Desert. It's the largest fog harvester in the world. But I ended up making a much smaller version of that. And we were able to do chemical tracing, all kinds of stuff to make sure it met potability standards. And long story short, it actually was good. It's very seasonal dependent and it's very small quantity. So not going to change the world, but maybe it will help you out with your local small backyard farm. So just a fun little grad school project. And that was kind of the beginning of my exploration career, although I did not know it at the time. So then that fateful application that you had asked about whenever I applied to this job that I currently have, I got back to Iceland and I shortly after that started my work in Hillsborough County. And I kind of just thought, maybe that Iceland trip will just be the last thing I do. Kids or grandkids will say, Grandpa went to Iceland one time. That was kind of neat. And I thought that'd be it. But then a very eventful moment happened. A show aired its pilot episode on the Discovery Channel. It was, if it works with me, there we go. Tales from the Explorers Club, which I don't know if anybody watches Discovery Channel or Josh Gates or anything like that, but he's got a lot of shows on that. He does a lot of the travel, fun, adventure type stuff. And the first episode was about, I think it was called Highest Highs, Lowest Lows. So it's about the guy who went to Everest and the people who went down to the Marianas Trench. And I was like, well, this is it. This is the group I need to be a part of. So I looked at it, the application. Before I get ahead of myself, that's just a quote I really love from Moby Dick. So just kind of captures my ethos, if you will, with the wanting to explore. But I knew I wanted to join that group. And I looked at the application and I said, well, I'm not qualified at all because it was asking what are your publications you have regarding exploration, all these other crazy things. And I was like, well, That was a fun little short-lived dream, wasn't it? So, but then something in the back of my head said, you know what, why don't you just keep going with it? You're in your master's program. Just try to get more skills. I mean, you're never going to be the ideal person if you don't become the ideal person. So I dedicated myself to, pursuing all kinds of opportunities and ended up getting my master's degree. I was always on the hunt for some sort of new adventure. I was able to publish with UF with my master's education. And eventually, along that journey, I had reached out to a group, kind of local group. They're out in Clearwater called Water for Mercy. Water for Mercy does humanitarian projects with remote villages in Africa. What they basically do is they take donors who are quite wealthy to help sponsor a village, and they take them through the Serengeti. They get to see the beautiful landscape, and then at the very end of it, they get to see the solar powered well that they funded, and all the people who are now benefiting from probably the first safe water they've ever had. And there was a gentleman who could not make the trip, and I guess he was wealthy enough to where that wasn't soul crushing. That was just Tuesday for him. And he said, well, why don't you give it to that kid that's been doing free labor for us for a while? Because I had reached out to the CEO a few years prior, and I was like, hey, I'm in grad school. I don't know if I'm going to do a PhD or what, but I'd like to get experience with grant writing or, whatever, just to build that skill that I didn't have. And she said, well, sure, I'd love free labor. So that worked out quite well. It was a very wonderful little symbiosis we had there. And then I ended up, shortly after graduating, being able to be a subject matter expert on one of those projects. And then I'm not an engineer, but this is an engineer course that group offers. And that's a student who completed the course, and these two are engineers, father-son duo. So they were just nice enough to let me pretend like I was an engineer and be a part of the learning material. But it was a really transformative experience. I mean, how can you see things like that with the kid who's drinking water for the first time and not be moved by that type of thing? And what I also like about it too is that a lot of times nonprofits will kind of just go save them and leave, and then it's like, well, like I hope it all stays well. What I like about Water for Mercy is that they work with a group called Innovation Africa, and they actually do monitor across time how the wells do. Is the solar powered panels needing replacement? Is the water still being drawn at an appropriate level? You can't just, again, like us, you can't just draw whatever you want. You have to really be careful about how much you're drawing. And I don't know the exact amount, but there is like a water governor, so to speak, that works out there with them, and they allow the allotted amount per person. So, it's certainly a controlled thing. It's not just a free for all once you implement it. One thing that's really great about this is just a few weeks ago, this village in particular, I wasn't a part of this expansion, but they got expanded to food security as well. So now, a lot of times there's this very unfortunate kind of paradox in humanitarian work, where if you fix the water supply issue, this is going to sound very dark, but people don't die as much. That's great, all for it. But what happens now when the food doesn't keep up with all the new mouths you have? Now you have a starvation problem. So it's like kind of this cruel victory. It's like, yay, we're all living long enough to not eat. So that's what this was expanded upon for. They wanted to bring in drip irrigation, some of the ways they can use that safe water to address that issue before it becomes an issue. So that was just a nice little convenient thing that happened right before this, so like a week or two ago. And just while I was there, I took a million photos, but these are some of the highlights. So these are some of the people I met along the way. That's a guide named Richard. He's a safari guide out there. So he told us all about everything. I mean, you name it, he knew it. That is, if anybody likes Lion King, that is actually the rock that inspired Lion King. So Disney took a little bit of liberties with the grandeur of it, but that's it. And then that is an elephant that held us hostage until we gave him food. It was a one-way road, and he basically was like, you ain't leaving, so you give me something kind of thing. And when it's like a 10-ton animal, you give him something. So, and I did not take this photo, but it's probably my favorite photo from that expedition. This is the Great Migration. So once again, Lion King-esque, this is all the wildebeest running. Hopefully no Mufasa's getting caught and all that. But I mean, it was just wild. I mean, how do you see like 100,000 wildebeest not be moved? So always like to show that too. And then with all that wonderful adventure also came a little bit of a, perspective shift too, is that I'm not saying things are perfect here in America, but it could be a lot worse. I mean, it's one of those things where I really do feel like, I'm not saying you can't complain about things here, but you really do have to be careful about not being too not generous enough with the way you were brought up. And because I mean, look at this. I mean, look at the school. It doesn't have walls. You know what I mean? And that, like I said, it doesn't mean that you can't address problems here. And I do believe that we could improve, but it also was quite sobering to see that, with my life, the way I was brought up, maybe I should try to work on things and help people experience the type of life I have. So, although it was hard to see, I do think it made me a little more wise, hopefully. No, I just like to always show that, to show it's not always just fun. Sometimes you do see some quite sad stuff. I mean, this right here is a group of women who have been standing in line for God knows how long to dig that hole. That's a water hole. So, and unfortunately, in this part of the world, they're quite blunt with what roles women have and what roles men have, and digging for water all day is a woman's job in their part of the country. So it's hard living. So, it's just something I like to bring up because it is important to mention. Now back to fun stuff. So after I came back from Tanzania, I was that position that I was in with the lab, I was still doing, but a new role came up, which is currently experiencing right now, where it was going to be a much more public facing role. And my director felt like I was uniquely equipped because I had all these unique experiences with Iceland and Africa to talk to people. And I'm kind of recycling some material here, but these are the same, basically the same slide as my last one, where I do things like speak to Great American Teach-In, or I go to the podcast, that type of stuff, and talk to you all. So it's nice because it actually bled into my domestic work as well. It gave me some skills. But then, keep in mind, still trying to do the Explorers Club stuff. Still didn't feel quite qualified yet. Imposter syndrome was there and it was strong. So I was like, all right, well, Africa's really cool, but you didn't really publish anything from it. It was a very great experience, but is that really enough? So I ended up finding a group called Earthwatch. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Earthwatch, but they partner up people who are scientists with tourists. So people who want to be a part of field research can tag along in these really cool parts of the world and kind of learn something too. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. I'll be sort of in this weird middle zone. I'm a scientist, but not their researcher. And I'm also a tourist, but so it was like, it was interesting. So I ended up finding this really cool expedition that I kind of viewed as like my workcation 2 years ago now, in Andorra. I don't know if anybody knows where Andorra is because I didn't know where it was prior to this expedition, but it's in between Spain and France. So if anybody knows dog breeds, there's the Great Pyrenees, dog breed, real big. The Pyrenees mountain range is where Andorra is located. The mountain range is bigger than Andorra. So that's how small this country is. 40,000-ish people, so about the size of Plant City. Puts it in perspective. But they were doing diatoms and alpine water studies. So once again, really in line with what I wanted to do. It was soil and water science. So I ended up taking part in it, and it was my vacation for 2024, and I really enjoyed it. While this was all happening, I had actually submitted my application to the Explorers Club, and I was able to get in. So thankfully, I'm now officially a member. It's actually my year on with the club was like 3 or 4 days ago. And I kept going into it. I was like, all right, you've made it, but we don't stop here. So I, once again, was finding myself with that itch that the author of Moby Dick was talking about, where he said there's an itch for things remote. And I found a group called Taxon Expeditions. They are, in my opinion, no offense to Earthwatch, I think they're actually superior to Earthwatch because they're led by a Nat Geo explorer, Dr. Eva, and I'm not going to do her a disservice by trying to pronounce her last name, but that you can do your best. And that's her there. So she's a Nat Geo explorer, and she prefers to take scientists, but she will take people who are laymen, if you will, in to really remote areas to try to find new species. Because this particular expedition was with Montenegro, and there was a hydroelectric dam that is being proposed to be built in Komarnisa Valley. Komarnisa Valley is one of the few last wild rivers in Europe. So it's kind of this interesting thing here where it is a green energy, hydroelectric, it's not fossil fuels, and a lot of people are for that. And Montenegro is wanting to get with the modern world on this stuff. But should it come at the cost of destroying one of the last untouched rivers? I mean, you don't usually see green versus green, but we talk about politics and stuff. This was one of those situations. So I don't even know what my stance is on it. I'm not against hydroelectric. But it does feel kind of strange to say, yeah, let's just destroy this place that we haven't touched really. But what Dr. Eva does is we'll try to build as much evidence surrounding the place as possible. So it could be hydrologic. Okay, I'll try to speed it up then. So they'll do hydrologic data, entomological, the whole 9 yards. And what they end up doing with that is just giving the locals information to work with. So it's, it's your land, your country, but here's the information. If you feel like this is of more intrinsic value than what the dam represents, we can make it maybe a World Heritage Site. And if you want to turn it into a dam, at least we documented this before it was gone forever. So she takes people all the time. Once again, if you're interested, that and Earthwatch, look them up. And then I got to do ice caves, so that was really cool. I didn't get to go in that vertical one, but I did get to go into the horizontal one. And then I found that spooky goal, so that was kind of neat. I like to explore that.
What is it?
We think it's either, well, it's certainly a type of feline. It might be a lynx. It could just be a domestic cat, to be honest, but probably, yeah, so some type of feline. And then this is possibly, I want to say possibly, a new species that I actually found. So they know what it is as far as what order of insect it belongs to. It's called Archaeonatha. You might notice it looks a little bit like a lobster. So it hasn't really devolved or diverged, that's the word I'm looking for, diverged evolutionarily from the crustaceans. And that's why it looks kind of like how it did probably 10 million years ago or whatever. So the kicker with that is that there's not really any experts in Montenegro for Archaeonatha. So I'm in this weird paradox where I need somebody to verify it, but there's nobody to verify it. So it's kind of Schrodinger's new species at this point. So I'm going to try to speed up since we only got a few minutes left. And then also while we were on that expedition, we did eDNA, which if anybody knows what that is, it's pretty much environmental DNA. That could be in the form of like blood from leeches or scat, like fecal matter from animals. And it gives you a good idea of what is out there, what animals are out there. Maybe you'll find something that they thought was extinct, or maybe it's predators you didn't know existed. But there was also an explosive discovery that was made. And I mean that quite literally. There was a World War II bomb that we found out there that had not detonated yet. We're pretty sure it's a dud. We did not get close enough to find out. And thankfully, one of the people in our expedition was a student at one of the local universities. And her dad was like, I don't know if he's the top general, but he was a general in their military. So she was like, Dad, can you send somebody to go deal with that? So I don't know. Maybe it's still waiting there, or maybe it's been removed. But danger is afoot sometimes in these places that are untouched. And this is just a really nice photo I took of the canyon. So people have been there before, but it's as close to unexplored as you can possibly get in the modern day. So just a wonderful shot. I'd hate to see it go, but who knows? You never know. And lastly, now enrolled in a doctorate program with University for Peace, which is it's not a UN school, but it's associated with the UN. It's located in Costa Rica. And basically what I'm trying to do, long story short, because I know that's a lot of information, is I'm trying to be a scientific diplomat. So kind of like what you were talking about with your question regarding how do you depoliticize, that's what I'm hoping to do. A lot of times, I don't know who's familiar with investing terms, if there's like going short on a stock, going long on a stock. Going long is the optimistic one. You think it's going to do well across time. I want people to be long on the planet. I want people to be long for their fellow humans. And I think that if they see stuff like this and they're able to get an appreciation for it like I do, that might be possible. So that's all I have for you. If I have any questions regarding that, I'm more than happy to answer them. Anything at all?
The University of Peace, is that something that you're gonna do virtually or?
Yes, so because it's an international school, it's actually an executive doctorate. So what it is, it's designed to work with people who are full-time professionals. So your class is your job. So, it's not, I will have to do work when I get home, of course, like, draft my abstracts and do some research and stuff, but they try to tie it specifically to your field that you're in. But yes, it is sort of remote, so. The campus is in Costa Rica, if you were ever interested in actually going, so. Is that it for everybody?
Are the flags on your arm tattoo? I've been looking at that. Are they from your adventure and your
Yes,
exploration?
so I joke and I call it my resume tattoo. So So I actually need to add a few, but I got Iceland, I think you know that one, and Tanzania. So, but yeah, good eye. So.
Been trying to figure that out the whole time. Ask in the middle.
I want to ask about like the reuse in Hillsborough County, like water reuse, and I was wondering like what are your thoughts to like bolster and to reinforce it and to make it more like reclaimed water, or do you reclaimed water and reuse? I mean, I'm all for it. Again, it's one of those things, like, I don't know if you were here for it, but I had mentioned there was like a feast or a famine issue with it. It's one of those things where I don't know how they're gonna get around that particular issue, so I think it will have to be part of the solution to adopting alternative things. I don't think we can just only adopt reclaim to use. I do think eventually somebody's gonna have to give and we'll have to replace some of that land with something. There's a term called Florida friendly landscaping that University of Florida actually really endorses. They have a whole course for it. And that introduces things like replacing some of that monoculture, that St. Augustine or that Bahia grass with something that doesn't need as much water. So I think it's gonna be a piece of the puzzle. I don't think it's gonna be the full part. But I'm all for it. Other than that, it's limited. I had like a follow-up question with that. I was like, is there a way to like scale up? I'm not like too, I'm familiar a little bit, but not like have more available, you mean? Yeah, to get our scale to like, if we have like one, how could we get scale to 2 or 3? So I'm sure, yes, there could be. It would come at the cost of probably building more infrastructure. So, it's one of those things like, is that going to be fun with the taxpayers? I don't know. That's the county commissioner decision at that point. But yeah, I mean, they are building a thing called the One Water Campus down in that Waimama area. I'm not sure exactly when that's set to be done, but I think it's like, I want to say 2029, I want to say. But it's to address some of that issue that we were talking about where that South County area, that spike. And with that new campus would also come more infrastructure. So in theory, you could have more wastewater plants and they probably will, because why not? If you're building out there to address the issue, right? When it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it will require more pipe and more facilities, but it's certainly doable. I just don't know if it would be necessarily done. That would be the distinction. Gotcha. Thank you. No problem. Is that it for everybody? All right. Well, thank you for having me.
I invite everybody to go ahead and grab some pizza, which was back-ish.
Just kind of take a big picture, photo before. Yeah, and then we can have like.
Thank you. No problem at all. You're welcome.
Yeah. He yelled for me.
I know.
Can you all join
I'll send you.
the front? Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Oops.